Welcome, advocates, to another episode of the Leading Equity Podcast, a podcast that focuses on supporting educators with the tools and resources necessary to ensure equity at their schools. Today's special guest is Nicole Terizzi. So without further ado, Nicole, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
The pleasure is mine. I'm excited to talk to you about our topic today. But before we get into it, I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself and what you currently do.
Sure. As you said, my name's Nicole Terizzi, someone who thrives on collaboration, creating impact. I started my career as a teacher and have since gone into the fundraising space, but have stayed focused on equity and opportunity. And so really passionate about continuous learning and always looking for ways to grow personally and professionally. Outside of work, I have 2 young kids and a wonderful partner. Currently live in the Pacific Northwest, so do a lot of hiking and outdoor play, and definitively love to read when I can, which helps keep me balanced and inspired in the work that I do.
Awesome. Well, I see you said you're in the Pacific Northwest. I see that outside it's not gloomy out there, so it's not that part of the party. I used to live in Oregon, so I just remember those days where you didn't see the sun for months. So good for you. Good for you. It's just not my
always an excuse to curl up with a book in a rainy day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you're an author. Tell us a little bit about your book, and then we'll get into today's topic.
Sure. Yeah, I released a book called Learning in Freefall just a few months ago. Really excited to share kind of my background and experience. It really hones in on my first 2 years of teaching in the Teach for America program and explores the intersection of race, poverty, mental health, and education, and really pretty vulnerable piece, but tries to leave with hope for sure.
Absolutely. Well, links in the show notes, folks. Make sure you grab yourself a copy. So, Nicole, I want to start with that because you said it was your first 2 years. And I just want to start with, why was the first 2 years so pivotal to where you felt like I need to document this in some way that I can share with others?
Sure. During those first 2 years, I'd always been a writer. And so it was one of the ways that I kind of coped with what I was experiencing, both prior to being a teacher and then being a teacher, was keeping a journal. And so I was able to really view that day-to-day kind of monotony of things. But those first 2 years were pivotal because it was my first career outside of college. And it was a really difficult experience. And in many ways, it was what I had signed up for with Teach for America, being placed in what was considered a rural or urban failing school. But it was incredibly difficult and overwhelming. There were so many levers that needed to be pulled in the classroom. It often felt like you couldn't pull all of them. And so it was difficult to felt like you were creating change, which is something that I would say all teachers strive for.
I got a lot of colleagues, friends out there, those who are also educators that work in what is considered high needs area. And we go to teacher school. Some of us do. Some of us have that experience, the teacher training and in service, all that stuff. But I can say this from a personal experience. Like, I went to teacher school and I did my student teaching, but my first job teaching, I learned on the job, if you will, right? A lot of stuff, and I made a lot of mistakes. And so I'm just curious, you mentioned that it was tough, it was hard. What are some of the things, if you can, provide a few examples of what tough looked like for you?
What was really difficult for me was, like, I went through an alternative pathway with Teach for America and going to OWN. Like, I didn't have the 4-year support, though I ended up getting a master's degree in education. But I knew how to write a lesson plan. I knew how to deliver an effective lesson to my students. I had all the things that I needed from a curriculum standpoint. And what was most difficult for me was navigating all of the additional things that were expected as far as the social emotional learning. Honestly, even like so many of the students come with, for lack of better term, baggage. They have things that they're navigating at home that need to be addressed in order for them to learn. And whether that's access to a healthy meal, or whether that's navigating housing that's stable, or all of the things that they're bringing along to the classroom that are detractors from allowing them to learn. And so it was really difficult to ensure access to all of those resources, as I mentioned, to kind of pull all of those different levers, whether it's the system itself with systemic racism, to access to resources within the classroom. It wasn't something that you necessarily prepare for either, as far as like, well, you don't have enough books for every student. What do? Donors choose. Like there are lots of ways to navigate all of these barriers that arise, but it's something that you don't necessarily learn in college, or whether a master's degree or a PhD. Those are things you have to learn in the field.
I got you. All right. So what's the message that we can give to, I mean, I'm sure there's some listeners out there that are within their first 5 years of teaching that might be on an alternative certification route, and they may be feeling some similar things. And I live in Phoenix, and like a lot of schools have already started up. Some schools are going to be starting soon. And I want to see what kind of message we can give to those. So let's talk about some of the learning things. So you said that, hey, here's some things that were difficult. What were some ways that you sought help and things that you learned throughout this process?
Yeah, finding mentors and mentorship from individuals within your school or even within your district, people that have the experience in navigating all of those levers that need to be pulled. And as much as you can, I know that bandwidth is always tough, but trying to leverage and utilize your school administration for support as well. Nothing new under the sun. There are resources available. Those teachers within the school that know how to navigate these things. They've been there before. And so as best you can, finding a mentor within your school, I would say definitively is an incredibly important part of those first years of teaching.
Walk me through that process. How did you find your mentor?
We got assigned mentors. So like that helps some,
Okay.
But honestly, like I felt that just having conversations and building relationships with the teachers within your school, as there are like professional development where you're working with other teachers inside your district, you have the capability to build relationships there too. And oftentimes everybody's been new. And so they're willing to chat, they're willing to share those resources. Teaching is an incredibly difficult job. And unfortunately, fewer young students are even going down the path of teaching. So finding that support is critical to, I would say, to your success as a teacher.
Okay. So you had that relationship. Were there other teachers that maybe you connected with as well? And can you talk to me about like, how did that come about? Like, how did you, like, I'm thinking about my listeners, and I'm trying to pull out, like, what are some steps that you took in order to connect with some of the other teachers out there?
Sure. I would say finding people that are through professional development who are in your same grade level or like teaching the same subject matter as you can be really helpful. And so speaking from my experience, I definitively collaborated with a few other middle school teachers. They weren't even necessarily teaching the same content as me, but we worked really, really closely together and kind of banded together to create resources, to create systems that we could share with one another that helped create consistency across the middle school as a whole. And then I actually taught elementary school as well. And there's one teacher who actually taught the grade level above me. And she was a veteran teacher. And I saw her effectiveness in the classroom. And I don't always know that she loved you when I engaged with her, honestly, because like I was the young person that was kind of pestering her, but ultimately she saw the impact that she had on me and the teaching that I was doing. And after those first few times, like we really did build a relationship with one another. And I still think of her, even though that was at this point 15 years ago, of her fondly, because she helped create impact for me. She was a mentor for me, whether she wanted to be or not.
Yeah, that's what happens. We end up serving that role, and hopefully down the road, I'm not sure how long you were in the classroom, but maybe you had opportunities to pay it back for other newcomers.
Definitely. Yeah. I taught for 4 total years. I'm not in the classroom any longer, but have stayed in the equity space. I work as a fundraiser and have been in the nonprofit space, focused on access to education and opportunity through also workforce development programs. And so definitively, as I've learned and grown in my career, have sought to, it's not really, but I've talked about like bringing people to the dark side. I'm transitioning people from corporate to the nonprofit space, trying to bring them into doing that. It's incredibly difficult work, but it's work that's needed, and it's exciting to get people excited about doing that work. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Let's switch gears for a second, because I imagine, and I heard you mention it, there was an emotional toll that you took on from this position? And maybe I'm not sure as far as what that looked like. So can you share with us a little bit about what the emotional toll that played on you within your first couple of years of teaching?
Sure. I explore it really fully in the book that I wrote, Learning in Freefall. But I was diagnosed very early in my life with anxiety and depression. And so I'd learned to navigate those things through the large majority of my life. But teaching in an under-resourced classroom and was really, really difficult, and honestly brought a lot of those things to a head. And so the mental toll of teaching is massive. As I mentioned, I learned how to write a lesson plan and I knew how to deliver an effective lesson, but navigating students that were coming to school hungry or who were experiencing violence at home or a multitude of other things, and trying to support them and navigating those mental health journeys themselves, and trying to identify their emotions and then respond to them in a positive way was really difficult. And that emotional labor that takes place in the classroom is something that is far too often not spoken about. And particularly, there are a lot of great programs that have been put into place around supporting students in identifying their emotions, so that we're not just navigating in crises, but far too often we're still focused on the students, and we forget about the teachers themselves who are supporting in this way as well.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about it. So you were able to quote unquote survive through that time frame. What were some of the things that you did, like for self-care, maybe supporting your mental health?
Sure. I'll own having that background. I had to go through and navigate some pretty extreme things. I started with the kind of tried and true things that I had gone through with just therapy, a wonderful therapist that I worked with weekly to navigate those things. And then went back on medication. It's something that I had experienced in my life, leveraging antidepressants to support with that. And then ultimately going to a psychiatrist who helped me navigate what became a crisis for me in my second year of teaching. So worked with that psychiatrist to identify a pathway that isn't often taken. I leveraged electroconvulsive therapy, which honestly is something nobody talks about. And at that moment in time, I didn't realize was still even a thing. But I credit that doctor with saving my life. And that was an extreme pathway that worked for me. I wouldn't say it's one that I would recommend for everybody, but something that, like I said, I talk about in the book, because I feel like all too often, particularly in navigating mental health struggles, people don't talk about them and they become stigmatized because of that. And so felt the desire and need to share this story in hopes that it would help others realize that even at the darkest depths, there is hope.
So was there, I don't know if you can share, but like, was there a moment, like that pivotal moment that you said where you're like, I need outside help? Would you like to share?
Yeah, I'll own it's pretty heavy, but there was for me, and I'm lucky in that sense as far as having grown up navigating these things. It's something that I was pretty clearly able to identify. There was kind of a lowest of lows point where it happened to be after Christmas. I had left my family home, was headed back to my apartment on my own. It was kind of like the lull between the Christmas and New Year's. And I had prior been working with a psychiatrist that I knew well. But as I had come back from that trip, I knew being alone in my apartment, I was like, if I don't get help, I'm going to do something that is a permanent response to a temporary problem. And so I called that doctor and said, "Hey, Dr. McNally, I need some help." And he said, "I will meet you at the hospital." And so, as I said, I definitively credit him with saving my life. He was there for me and I was able to go in and get that support, which is where we ultimately decided, particularly with my background, having leveraged antidepressants in the past. I'd already been going to therapy, and he said, "You're already at max dosage of these things. You're already going to therapy. I can continue to monitor you, but I do think you're a prime candidate for electroconvulsive therapy." And I was like, I thought that was like, oh, one flew over the cuckoo's nest. People actually do that still. And he said, "Yeah, and I think you're a prime candidate for it." And so I feel lucky that I was able to utilize that in a way that ultimately supported my mental health in the grand scheme of things. As I mentioned, when you're at the depths of the darkest place, It's hard to see that light. And I feel really lucky that 15 years later, I'm in a really positive place. I have 2 young kids and a partner. And 15 years ago, that definitively was not in my sights.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. Again, I know that there's more to the story. We're on an interview, and so folks, again, we definitely want you to check out Nicole's story. And so again, I appreciate you for sharing, Nicole. I'm not familiar with what is it?
Electroconvulsive therapy, ECT for short.
Yeah, tell us about that. What is that?
So I mentioned One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That's honestly what most people associate it with. ECT is when and the crazy part is, like, I don't know that I did all the research for it. I was told about like what possible effects it might have in the long term, but like my vision was like, either I can sit in this hospital and do nothing, like do my therapy and continue taking meds, which are clearly not working for me, or I can take action and do something. And so as part of the process of writing this book, like I did a deep dive. I actually pulled my medical records to see like, okay, how many sessions did I have? When did they actually take place? What were the notes around them? And so I ended up having 10 sessions. It's literally a medically induced grand mal seizure, where I see you. Same, that like it's a pretty intense pathway to go down. But as I said, like I didn't see a lot of alternative options for me. And like I said, ultimately it impacted me in a positive way. And so I did 10 sessions spread out through over multiple months. I mentioned like I went into the hospital that first week or that week in between Christmas and New Year's. And here's the crazy part too. And that I look back and like, what was about? I literally did the first few sessions before school started, and then literally would go in and get a session and go into school and teach afterwards. And so like mind blowing that like I was so unable to take care of myself at that point. I was doing this and then going back into the classroom and teaching, which I look back on now and think that was pretty crazy. But
Well, I was going to ask you, how did that impact your teaching, going from the session based off of how you described it and then going into the class? Tell us a little bit about that.
yeah, I honestly, like when I was young, the vision was like you did what you needed to do to get the job done.
Yeah.
And I saw like that really was my mindset. And that said, there's such a stigma around mental health too, that largely nobody knew that this was happening. I had a couple really close friends, and honestly too, like I needed support. I wasn't able to drive after these sessions. And so had somebody drop me off in the morning, it would take a couple hours to go through the process. You'd go under general anesthesia, you would get the ECT, and then somebody would pick me up and drop me off at school. And like I said, looking back now, that seems absolutely crazy that I would do that. But yeah, the mindset to me was like, you do what you need to do to get the job done. And far and above, I was able to be effective in the classroom. I had my lesson plans ready to go. And I came in like an hour and a half late. And I had just told my principal, like, hey, I'm having a procedure being done. I'm going to need to be gone and be late these days of school. And that was that. I didn't have to answer any additional questions around why.
Now, were you like, forgive me for my ignorance, but like in school after a session, were you like zoned out, or were you fully aware?
I'm sure I was foggy a bit. And like, there are a couple things, like one of the biggest like effects and impacts of doing the ECT is the potential for short-term memory loss. Okay. And so there were things there that they're murky, and they're still murky for me now at times, but that's where like, honestly too, like I have this journal that I was keeping kind of a multi days a week, a log of what was happening. And so like gave me that vision. But I'm going to own, like, I have memories of like what that experience was like. There was an amazing nurse that was there for many of those sessions. And by the end of those sessions, she's like, you look so much better than when I first saw you. And so that also like was affirming that like, okay, this is working for me. But I'll own too, like I had family members that did know, of the ones that did know, didn't approve of me choosing this pathway. But ultimately, I was a young 20-something, and that's what I thought I needed to do to take care of myself. And there are no regrets. So,
yeah. Well, it sound. I mean, we weren't there when you were experiencing all of this, and so yes, everyone's going to have a portion of the story, if you will, as far as the reasons why you chose to go this route. Ultimately, as you said, 15 years now, you have a partner, you have children, you're in a different career, you're thriving. So it sounds like this therapy was effective, and so you're speaking very positively of it. So I can see where folks may feel a certain way, but at the same time, it seems to have worked for you.
Yeah. Like I said, it's not something I'd recommend for everyone, and it definitively was not like my
Okay,
first choice of things I
sure.
would like to experience in my life. But with the background that I had, I was diagnosed formally with anxiety and depression in 3rd grade. I started taking antidepressants when I was in 5th grade. And having that background and having had built upon them. So like I had experiences in high school and experiences in college where like it made sense for me. And yeah, big advocate for people doing what they need to do to keep themselves healthy.
Okay, thank you. And so let's go back because this may not be everyone's journey. So there might be some folks that say, what, I'm having a hard time. I feel like I'm at my wit's end. Are there other strategies that you can recommend that maybe you also tried out just for those who, again, who are within their first few years of school of teaching, I guess?
Yes, I have a couple of things that come to mind. Obviously, like self-care,
Yeah.
finding your self-care, finding what I call like your pressure valve type
Mhm.
of thing. So I did a lot of hot yoga, which like isn't pretty intense. Like you get into a really hot room, like I would sweat it out. Like that felt really good for me. During that time, I had my first massage ever in my entire life. Some people don't like that. It was really impactful and supportive for my well-being as well. But the other thing that I did not do a great job of when I was really young that I have learned to do now is drawing boundaries. I would say that my boundaries were very blurred, and part of that was just from the naivete of not knowing any better. But I didn't have a partner then. I lived with a roommate that was a law student, and so like she was always studying as well. And so like I brought my work home with me pretty much 24/7. I was living, eating, breathing,
Yeah.
teaching. On the weekends, like I would incentivize my students to go on field trips. So I would say like, "Hey, if we have a really great week, like we'll get to go to I can take a couple of you to the science museum or the art museum," or like I even incentivized and took a couple students to a Royals game type thing. And so like it was my identity. And for many teachers, I feel like teaching is their identity, and there are healthy ways to do that and there are unhealthy ways to do that. And I would say like I definitively leaned into the latter at the beginning, where I was doing it in an unhealthy way where there weren't any boundaries.
So you were taking them on your own dime, on your own time to various field trips or excursions experiences?
Yeah, so and that's where too, like in today's world, I don't think that would fly necessarily, but I would always have somebody else with me. At times, like I had my dad come with me to visit, and like I would always get permission from their parents. Obviously, I wasn't just like randomly picking up one of my students, and we do like permission slips of sorts. But yeah, on my own dime, and I have really great memories of those experiences. Also talk about them in my book, but again, like probably there's some blurred boundaries there, like probably
Yeah.
not appropriate in some ways. And then also, like I said, teaching was my identity. It absolutely was who I was through and through in a not so healthy way.
Oh, you didn't know any better. And so now it's just like, okay, obviously that's something you would have done differently had you had another experience or another chance to start over, if you will. Are there any other words of advice that you could say, if I was to do this over, I would do this differently?
The boundaries are a really big one that
Mhm.
I would do differently.
Yeah.
I would also potentially find my advocates really
Mhm.
early. That there are times I wanted to go through the right channels because it was the right thing to do, type of thing, where there are times that you could ask for forgiveness and not permission
Okay.
in doing what you needed to do to get the job done. A lot of times I feel like in education, bureaucracy is part of it. And it was my classroom. And like each of you as teachers have your own classroom to create impact and create change in the ways that you need to do. And so that there are ways that you can learn to navigate the bureaucracy without hitting your head against the wall.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. And definitely, so sounds like boundaries are the biggest one. Now, when you say boundaries, right, I want to make sure we have a clear definition on what boundaries mean to you. So go ahead and break that down for us.
Yeah, boundaries for me would mean if I needed to take work home at night, say grade papers, I'm going to do it for an hour and then I'm done type
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah.
And that means like probably not taking students on field trips on the weekends. It's probably not like maybe at the beginning of the school year when you need to do that front loading and lesson planning type of thing, but not spending the entire weekend working because I had burned myself out so quickly. So ensuring that there's that me time built in there to take care of yourself, to be a person outside of teaching and taking care of yourself and enjoying life is incredibly important.
Yeah, and sadly, a lot of us don't get that information, especially in the beginning of the year. Just like you said, maybe we just got a brand new curriculum. Maybe we just, again, we are still trying to learn how to create a lesson plan. What are all the components to a lesson plan, let alone the assessments that we need to do as well. And so we want to do a good job, and we want to make sure our students are set up for success. And then we spend our whole weekends, we spend every evening, we're waking up early in the morning, and yeah, that's not a sustainable model. But yeah, you do have to create those spaces in which you can have that self care, in which you can have some time to yourself, to your family, and your other personal affairs. That's not always taught in alternative certification programs, let alone teacher programs. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say you're right, it's not taught and it's almost expected that you're going
Yeah.
to do whatever you need to do to get the
Mhm.
job done. And I think that was my mindset in those first few years. It didn't matter to my own detriment. Figure it out.
Yeah, and then coming out of your own pocket, got to buy your posters, your bulletin boards, your school supplies, all those things, because maybe you don't have a classroom. Like you said, donor choose is an option. There's other options out there, but then so not everyone's comfortable with those things, or you don't get the money that you're looking for to fund donations that you're looking for. So it falls on you. So that kind of stress can definitely lead to some challenges. And so, as we can see, as you kind of shared a little bit about your story, that's where things led to. But again, on the bright side, you are in a much better place these days. Nicole, I will say this: I have definitely learned a lot from this conversation, and I hope our listeners out there, whatever year you're in when it comes to teaching, and whatever background training support you've had in regards to being a teacher, I think we can all take from your story. And again, show links in the show notes. But Nicole, I'd love for you to share any final words of advice to our listeners out there.
Yeah, I would just say that every day is a new day. So you it might have been a rough one and give yourself permission to wallow in that for a couple hours, rest of the day if you need, but the next day is a blank slate and a new day to go get that job done in whatever way you can. So trying to keep that optimistic vision for future that every day is a new day.
Every day is a new day. I love that. And that's a great way to end today's conversation. If we have some folks that want to connect with you, what's the best way to reach you online?
Sure. NicoleTerizzi.com has some contact. It has links to the book if you're interested, and I'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Nicole, it has truly been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.